Welcome everyone to the Science Communication Career Workshop. We hope today that you will learn a little bit about what science communication is and how to pursue it as a career path. This event was put together by both the UBC Centre for Brain Health as well as the Women's Health Research Cluster. The Centre for Brain Health builds on the University of British Columbia's impressive legacy of brain research and brings together experts in the fields of neuroscience, neurology, psychiatry, and rehabilitation sciences in a hub for training, research, and clinical care. It bridges basic science and clinical care and provides opportunities for education, collaboration, and interaction with patients across British Columbia. The Women's Health Research Cluster is an international network of over 350 multidisciplinary professionals that collectively strive to create a future where women and girls can live equitably healthy lives across their entire lifespan. The Women's Health Research Cluster promotes, expands, and catalyzes women's health research because we believe it holds the key to better lives, not just for women, but for all people. My name is Catherine Moore, and I manage the Women's Health Research Cluster, and I've got my colleagues from the Centre of Brain Health on the back end of the event here, and they're going to help us run everything smoothly. Before we begin, I would just like to recognize that we live, work, play, and participate in community on the unceded, ceded, and traditional territories of the 203 First Nations, along with 38 Métis chartered communities, each of which possess their own unique traditions and history here in this land that we now refer to as British Columbia. We acknowledge the importance of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's call to action, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and the BC Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. In all of our work, we are committed to ensuring the Indigenous people's rights to health and safety and the equal opportunity to participate in a manner that recognizes and respects Indigenous cultures and traditions. Today, I'm personally joining you from Vancouver, which is a part of the unceded homelands of the Coast Salish peoples and the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I encourage you all to take a moment to share with us in the chat box where you're calling in from today. We've got three incredible panelists for you today who are going to tell us a bit about their career journeys and what they've learned along the way. We're going to start the event off by hearing each of them share a little bit about themselves and about a project that they're proud of. Then we're going to have a panel discussion followed by a Q&A with the audience. So during the panel discussion or any point during this event, you're more than welcome to put your questions in the chat box. And after the panel discussion, I'm going to scroll through them and ask. At that time, you're also more than welcome to come onto the screen to unmute yourself and ask, or I can just ask your question for you. So let's get started. Let me just get here. I'm going to start us off by introducing Kate Shingler. Kate joined the Brain Canada team as Director of Marketing and Communications in 2020. She began her career as a journalist and spent a decade at Global Health. Kate then went on to lead the digital communications team at the McGill University Health Centre Foundation before joining Brain Canada. And I know we want to learn a lot about everybody's careers here, but it's also more fun to get to know them personally too. So we've asked all of our panelists to share a fun fact. And Kate's fun fact is that she's a certified yoga instructor who used those skills to volunteer at her children's daycare center, where they often pretended that they were wild animals to stretch, move, and breathe. And I wish that I could have been there. That would have been so much fun. Kate, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your career?
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks, Catherine, and thank you for having me. Thanks for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here with, my fellow panelists, but also to connect with the next generation of science communicators. As the Director of Marketing and Communications at Brain Canada, really no one day looked like the next. I think that's because we're a really small team. We're only 15. My department of communications and marketing is really 2. My key priorities at Brain Canada are really to enhance our profile. So we want to continue to build a reputation as the leading convener and enabler of excellent brain research. And then part of that is also strengthening relationships with our key audiences. So I think in science communications and all communications, you're always asking yourself, who is my audience? So in the case of Brain Canada, and probably some of your organizations too, that really includes a variety of different stakeholders. So for us, it's of course the general public, but it's also donors, it's also partners, and then the Canadian research community. So on any given day, my responsibilities can include interviewing a brilliant neuroscientist. It can include putting together a comms plan for the launch of a new funding opportunity, writing a press release about the progress of a study, and then also working on a lot of different public awareness activities. So this is my example I wanted to share with you. It comes at a very opportune time. This week is Brain Awareness Week. So Brain Canada is engaged in a really meaningful campaign online, in print, primarily social media, but we've grown to include a little bit of owned media as well. And it's really an example of the work we're trying to do to raise the profile of the value of research. So our campaign is built around, did you know? That's the concept. So we're really highlighting more than a dozen brain diseases and disorders, and we're asking questions to our audience with kind of salient facts. Did you know over 86,000 Canadians live with spinal cord injuries? Did you know about 1.2 million youth are affected by mental illness? Did you know there are more than 120 types of brain tumors? So we followed up with some of those statistics with kind of inspirational, we think, hope instilling quotes from the funded researchers that we work with. So the concept of the campaign really revolves around 3 steps. And I think for me, this is sort of the heart of what makes our communications efforts meaningful. And it's really, did you know that there's a problem? Did you know that people are trying to solve that problem? And did you know that you too can get involved? So we close each series of posts in this campaign with 3 ways to support brain research. You know, it could be raising awareness. So you can share on your own social media, you can talk to your friends and family. You can sign up to learn more about what we do and the researchers that we fund through our newsletter, or you can donate. You can donate to invest in brain research. My approach to science communications is the same approach I took as a general assignment reporter, as the DCOM of a public policy think tank, and then in my work at a hospital foundation. So for me, it's always trying to answer that fundamental question. And it's a question that can really be from somebody who's never heard of our organization. It can be from a stakeholder who really has vested interest, somebody who's directly impacted by the issue, or it could be from a major corporate or private donor. And for me, the question is, why should I care? So I see my role at Brain Canada as leading a kind of collective answer to that question and supporting the researchers to answer that question. You know, here's why you should care. We're all faced with issues where we feel helpless, bad news, challenges, disappointments. And I think it can be kind of easy to turn away. It can be easy. We're experiencing that watching the war in Ukraine right now. It's hard to bear witness. But we think that the stakes for communicating the need for science and for research has never been more critical. I mean, we're 2 years into a pandemic. Together as a society, we've benefited from a rapid development of vaccines and treatments, but none of that would have been possible without fundamental research, basic research. So for all of you who are interested in being part of this conversation, I think now is a really exciting time for you. It's an exciting time to get involved, to work with organizations, to distill complex ideas, to translate learning, and to facilitate that knowledge exchange, to answer the fundamental question, why should I care?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I can close just quickly, Catherine, if you like, by sharing that yesterday we held a virtual event at noon Eastern with The Walrus. So we partner with The Walrus magazine on some different public dialogues and conversations. This was a leadership forum in and around mental health issues. And for me, it was very successful. We highlighted 3 funded researchers. They talked about their projects, you know, high level, but it really was a chance for members of the general public to ask questions directly to neuroscientists and say, you know, what do you think of this? And it was very meaningful. Mm-hmm. And the stakes are really high when a researcher is answering the query of somebody who's directly impacted. So the moderator for our event yesterday was a woman who is a suicide prevention activist. She lost her son to suicide some years ago, Lynn Kane. So for her to be posing questions to researchers who are talking about their work, trying to address treatment-resistant depression, really meaningful. And so our work is to support them to be able to really, you know, meet those questions with the information that they've amassed, but also with compassion and empathy.
Mm-hmm.
So I can stop there for now because I know everybody else is going to have a chance to introduce themselves as well. But thanks again for having me.
Yeah, and so many good points that you've brought up there. And one of them that I think you're right is very, very topical is that we're living in the age of misinformation and how important the career of science communication is in sort of like guiding our society to amend that issue. And that's actually a pretty good segue into the next panelist that we'll hear from. Dr. Noeen Malik is a nuclear medicine scientist and research scientist at the Stanford School of Medicine. And she's the CEO and founder of Scientudio Incorporated and executive director of public affairs at the Global Immunization Action Networking Team with the World Health Organization and United Nations. On top of all of that, in her spare time, Noeen is also a cartoonist, and I'd love to see some of your cartoons at some point. If you can link us to them, that'd be great. But Noeen, can we hear from you about the kind of work that you're doing?
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for the invitation. It's my pleasure to join this meeting today, this session. And basically by profession, I am, as you said, I am a nuclear medicine scientist, which is basically for oncology and neuroscience. And I had been doing these science communications only for myself for a very long time, like for my presentations, for my papers, for my articles and like these things. And but during this pandemic, when everyone was sitting at home and when you are out of the lab and you have so many hours free for yourself, and then you start thinking out of the box to create something new for yourself. And then I actually made just a post on LinkedIn, just a general post that if anyone is interested, I would like to do the science illustrations for them for free, so they can just connect with me. And some companies, they came up, some professors came to me, and I made some science illustrations for them. And but then they came back to me with the paid work. And at that moment, I realized this was a skill that I had in my hand for so many years. I never thought to cash it actually for myself. I even never thought to add it to my resume that this is a skill that I have. And from that point was a turning point for me to turn it into something like into a corporate, like a business thing. And from that angle, I also was working with SQUIST at that time, like for Society of Canadian Women in Science and Technology. I was a director of events and communication there. And when we were organizing some science trivia challenges for children there. And when I do some slides with some cartoons, colors to give them the answer when their answer was wrong, to give them the scientific explanation. And I figured it out that children were very interested in those slides particularly. They like, all of a sudden you just wake up and you see, okay, what is going on there. So that was the moment when I realized that this is something that I can do in my spare time now during this pandemic, that I can create some sort of like children deck, playing deck with cartoons, with daily science meets I can incorporate there, and they can play and they can also learn about the scientific things, the daily things. And I can add some colors and like the simple things. And that's how I created, I went to that level. So I actually followed the steps by observing and like my surroundings and by going through different experiences and using those experiences to create something new for myself and to see that what can be done in future. So science communication and illustration is a very important aspect, I think. As Kate also mentioned about it, that it is sometimes there is a very huge gap of miscommunication and misinformation between scientists and in general public because of a language barrier. Like we, being the scientists, we like to use the complex words and complicated things, and we like to make our slides very plain, basically, and without any colors there. and which is not very attractive for general public. It's like a marketing thing. So you better, if you are in your approach for science communication, in communicating your message to the public, the better it is. So there is a huge gap of misinformation too. There are many scientific innovations. Sometimes the medicines come into the market. Sometimes the new treatments and therapies come into the market, but people are not aware of it. The biggest example is this COVID-19 situation. You can see that during all these pandemic situation, there were so many rumors and misinformations about immunization, about vaccination. Should we get it? Should we not get it? These are the new types of vaccination. These are not conventional vaccinations. And I dealt a lot being an executive director of public affairs with Giant. And my role there is to bring awareness in general public by reaching to their life, their mindset, like their intellectual level, right? You are conveying your message in their language, not your language. That's a challenge. So we have to bring this awareness. Then when you are bringing your scientific like innovations or things or information to the market, it's like a market, right? Then you also need to think the barriers. Sometimes there are many barriers. There are cultural barriers. There are geographical barriers to convey your scientific message there. So I think being a science communicator, you need to keep all these challenges in your mind, that who is your targeted audience, as Kate mentioned, and how you are going to approach that, which barriers and challenges you have to face that. And during my all these roles and like on different platforms, I always have to deal with these things, and I always have to create a different toolkit for different type of the audience for approaching them. And I think currently the most important projects that I'm working on, one was this children playing death. That was very near to my heart, basically. And I really poured my whole energy into that. But then there was so many demands about that I put it online, virtual, so that people can just download wherever they are, and they can print it themselves and in the form of the cards, and they can play. And the other project that, because I also work a lot as a volunteer, and I also created now my own NGO, Endorso. I work a lot for my current projects are with African and Asian countries, where I'm working to bring some new developments into the vocational training programs there. And the one campaign that we started recently is very close to my heart, and I am going to actually working on promotional material. Again, the science will be there, simple language will be there, but that is more about the women health and hygiene, because that's the biggest problem in African countries especially. We are working on the campaign to bring awareness and to provide the toolkits to the women in schools and the girls in schools, and we train them how to prepare these reusable, disposable sanitary pad kits, because they cannot afford it, and they have to stay at home, or they use the unhygienic condition, and they have to drop out of the schools. So this is also one of the major factor in the literacy rate among women there. So this is a campaign that we launched, and we are like helping the girls on ground, and we are providing them with these kits so that they can work over it. So these are the two projects that I am currently working on beside my research obligations in Stanford, of course. So
very exciting, Naveen. And, I really loved how you brought up that a lot of science communication is understanding the way that other people understand and communicate, and using that language to connect with them. That's a really salient point, I think. And so our final panelist is Dr. Arthi Gopinath, who is an associate scientific director at MedThink SciComm, where she supports medical communications for pharmaceutical companies that develop therapeutics for infectious and rare diseases. She previously worked as a science writer for Ava Women, which is a medical device company. And interestingly, Arthi completed her PhD in neuroscience here at UBC. But that's not her fun fact. In her spare time, she enjoys all sorts of arts and crafts, and most recently, she's digging into poetry. Welcome, Arthi.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you so much for having me on this panel. I'm really excited to talk more about science communication and my experience with it so far. Just as Catherine mentioned, I did complete my PhD and a brief postdoc at UBC, and I did do it in neuroscience. And what's been probably my favorite finding so far of my career is that as much as I really love neuroscience, as much as I learned so much at UBC, I really have just come to understand that I really just have a passion for science and talking about science and nerding out with fellow nerds about science. And so I've been very fortunate in my career to be able to focus on communicating about science. So early in my science communication career, I did focus on liaising with the public audience and focusing science writing in that particular aspect. But more recently, I've been working in the medical writing space. And so in this particular space, we focus on communicating with those of the scientific audience. And it's interesting because a lot of the issues that both Nguyen and Kate have mentioned around miscommunication, how do you think about the right type of audience, all of those things are still true, even when you're talking to fellow scientists who are also just as knowledgeable about many different aspects of the science. But when you really think about how many articles are being indexed on PubMed every day, every month, every year, there is so much information that's being put out there. How do you possibly kind of cut through the noise and really get to the heart of understanding the information that's being put out there so that you can really make informed decisions? And so that for these companies that are trying to put forward new therapeutics, how do you educate different specialists, different physicians around, here's what the latest that we know about these disease states, here are some new options, really trying to think through how do you overcome those barriers in communication. So as I first started at MedThink SciComm, I was working as a medical writer. And in that capacity, I was working more in sort of the traditional medical writing deliverable. So that's working through manuscripts, slide decks, presentations, posters. So getting to really work through a lot of the data for a company without necessarily having to be at the bench and doing all the data collection. So that was one of my favorite parts. But what was also really fun about that was I was basically getting paid to learn a lot about a lot of different disease states. So I have worked on a lot of neuroscience related accounts, but I have also had the opportunity to expand to working with infectious disease, rare diseases, genetic diseases, and really been able to expand my knowledge of science and medical research in so many different ways, which has been very personally and professionally rewarding. As I've grown a little bit more senior in my role, I've also now had the opportunity to work on more strategic projects. So thinking about how to help support pharmaceutical companies with their publication planning efforts, and how do they take information that they have and really cross to the audiences they want to go to. And when you think about how COVID really poses a barrier to a lot of companies, I mean, COVID was, of course, rightfully taking up a lot of bandwidth in terms of how do you put the right information out there, but there were a lot of other illnesses that still needed to have the right targeted agents, the right therapeutics. How do you roll those out? And how do you also make sure that physicians are just as aware about all these other illnesses of concern and all these other new agents that are coming out when you're in the middle of a pandemic? That was a really new barrier to think about. So getting the opportunity to really think about that and be working alongside pharmaceutical companies and making sure that they could communicate their new and exciting data was also very interesting as I was working more like a senior medical writer role. Now as an associate scientific director, I have the opportunity to work more with like the strategic lens. How do we think about what is the right way to put publications out there? So something that I think is really interesting is that publications themselves are evolving. And I have the opportunity to actually be part of the International Medical Publications Professional Society, or ISMAP. That is our professional society where we actually think a lot about these problems and how do we solve communication barriers for different audiences and how can we best put medical research out there. And I think something that's really new and exciting is this idea about how do we use digital strategies for that. So like videos, so graphical abstracts, infographics, podcasts, like what is the right way to still make sure we have that peer review process, but make sure you're communicating to your fellow scientists about what's the latest out there. And so my new favorite project, and the one that I really want to share, is that I will actually be presenting a poster at our next ISMAP conference, and it'll be about video abstracts. And I'm excited to see where this new line of research will be going.
Wow. And, you know, as I'm hearing you all just introduce your careers, I already feel like I've learned, you know, a lot. One thing that stood out for me is that each of you spoke about different sort of target audiences that science communication can focus on. Like Kate even brought in, you know, when you're communicating with donors, like there's a specific way that you should be talking about that. Noeen is working with children as well as, you know, a subset of, you know, the general public. And Arthi, you've brought in that even between researchers, the skills of science communication is needed. So that's really fascinating. And I'm glad that you guys brought that up. As we move into our panel discussion, I just want to remind everyone that you're welcome to add your questions in the chat box, and during the Q&A afterwards, I will start from the top and work my way down. But the first question for this panel discussion is directed at all of you. And I'm going to ask that we try to keep, you know, the answers as brief as possible. It's a big question, so I feel like we could probably do an entire hour for each of you individually just on this question. But for the sake of time, let's try to keep it as brief as possible. But I'm wondering if you can tell us, like, what was the path that led you to your current position, and like, were there any key like milestones that you can identify that happened along the way? Arthi, do you want to start us off?
Sure, happy to. So I think it was right around like halfway through my PhD that I realized that I was really interested in focusing on the communication side of science research. And so it was starting around then that I talked to my advisor about this. And fortunately, my advisor, Dr. Lisa Galea, she was really happy to hand off any writing projects and definitely gave anyone who was interested in writing the opportunity to work on writing projects. So that's where I really started to take helm of a lot of different papers that I was writing, but also looking at grants and things like that. And I just realized that I really liked writing and really wanted to keep going with that particular aspect. And so after volunteering for a few other science communication events towards like the end of my PhD, decided that I was going to commit to a career in science communication. So the first job that I started working in this particular space was in Ava Women. That was a startup company in San Francisco. I was working as a science writer for the marketing team. And in that role, I was able to work on different blog articles where I was taking women's research and translating it for public audiences in blog articles, and also just supporting like different ways of communicating answers that women have about reproductive health and putting it into various formats that would be useful for them. And I think that was really interesting, and it was really personally rewarding to be able to answer, like, if there's one place that has a lot of miscommunication, it's certainly women's health. And to really be able to take the knowledge that I had from my PhD and help directly support public audiences, that was very rewarding and fun. But I think ultimately working on a marketing team, I think there are different goals when you are working on that type of a team. And I think I just started to realize I was missing aspects that were more related to talking about data, and that I really kind of wanted to go back to working with more scientific audiences. So in that way, that led me to medical writing. And so from there, that's when I started working at MedThink SciComm, and that has been a really good fit so far for me. And to really be able to hone in on thinking about what's the right way to talk about data, what's the accurate way to talk about data, and then also think about these complex publications challenges and how we can make sure information gets to the audiences that we want in the right and accurate way.
So it started with a supportive supervisor and then sort of trickled down with different professional experiences for you.
Yes.
Kate, I imagine that your pathway may look a bit different than that.
It does, but what it has in common would be that love of writing. So I studied, I did my undergrad in women's studies. So a lot of feminist theory, but my thread was I love to write, and I wanted to write, and I love to storytell. So I was working right after my undergrad for a women's news magazine in Toronto that's no longer publishing. It did not accept any fashion or beauty advertising. So one of our only advertisers was the Royal Bank, and it is now defunct. It didn't survive for very long. It was called Women News Magazine. But that was my first foray into writing and journalism, and I went on to grad school in journalism with really a love of print. And then I sort of found my way into television, and at the time, which would have been like mid 2000s, there was a lot of growth because people were starting to consume news online in a really meaningful way. And so everybody was looking for that multimedia content that we're sort of talking about, video, audio, visual representation of a story. So I spent over a decade in television, really a lot of general assignment reporting and political reporting. And then I sort of ended up as the assistant news director in our newsroom in Montreal for Global TV. And there I started to feel that I needed to not only identify gaps and problems, but to have a voice in solving them. So that was for me the trigger for leaving journalism and entering into kind of, sort of a advocacy, public relations kind of storytelling that I thought would really be rewarding, as long as it was a cause that was close to my heart. So from my perspective, I sort of fell into science comms because I think of it also as like positive health outcomes for people. So, and I really, what you said too, Arthi, about women's health and the miscommunications around women's health issues, that totally resonates. And we're working right now to build these research programs that look at sex and gender differences in research. And then once you can do that really well, you can start to translate those learnings so that people become increasingly aware of all of the different ways that sex and gender actually does impact our health and our brain health, but all of our health. So anyway, in my case, I sort of fell into science comms, but like I say, I see it as an extension of storytelling and connecting actually with people.
Very interesting. It starts at the same point and both of your paths have gone in such different ways. I love that. Noeen, do you see any similarities between your pathway and what Kate and Arthi have shared?
Yeah, that's very interesting. But as Kate said, that it's more about the storytelling, right? So, and also being a researcher and scientist, when you are writing a research paper, you are actually doing the storytelling again. But of course, in very, very like scientific terminology that you're doing. I was always more of a graphic person, visual person, rather than writer person. And I am still the same person. I always like to convert the text, all the text that I have in the form of the graphics, in the form of the pictures. I think it's different from every person. Some people like to have more text, they are good. I am more like, if there are more graphics and pictures, my brain is much easier with that thing. Like it can grasp it more quickly. And I think that's also one of the basic tool of marketing, right? When you are doing the marketing, you add more graphics, you add more things, and then you are conveying the language through to the like pictures basically, right? I think this is also something which started when Walt Disney started all the animations and cartoons, when this whole thing started, and it was the way of connecting with the children. And when there are different genres of the cartoons where you can even convey the messages to the other people too, like to the scientific researchers and to other things. So I was always more like a visual and graphic person. And I always wanted to convert the different difficult text in the form of the simple language, which I can grasp and other people can also grasp. But of course, yes, I mean, it's like a translation process for me, like where you are translating like different, like you have all the toolkits and everything. Now it's up to you how you're going to do the translation. You're going to translate in the form of the like a text, or you're going to transform into the form of the graphic, or you're going to want to combine both together. And when you combine both together, then I think it's more valuable, it's more informative. And for me, the thing that how I continued my path towards it, because as a kid, I was always interested in, I am a painter too. So I was always interested in colors, in painting, in drawings and all these things. And I was also interested in science. For me, the science was something that you are basically, it was like a magic for me when I entered, right? So it was like, as you're converting something, you have a question for impossible, and you're just converting it into something possible. So the methodology is like a wand, or like a, something in your hand, or a spell in your hand that you are casting it. and you are just cooking the stuff and you're getting it done. So for me, I took science like that, and then I applied my vision and my visuals to that thing. And even when I read research articles and papers, when there's a lot of text, the first goal for me is to convert all that text for my convenience into the graphic so that I can look at it and then I can never forget about it, whatever I have read. But if I read 5, 10, 15 papers at one time, there is a chance that I can forget the text for some few important points. But when it is written in the form of the graphic in front of me, that graphic will stay in my mind for a long time. So this is something that actually it was a tool for me too, for my convenience too, because if you want to be a good scientist, you need to be very careful about everything, technical details, right? You don't want to miss out any point. So it was for my convenience too. I didn't want to miss the technical details, what I am reading and what I'm going to apply in my project. So that's how I converted all these things and I started using it. And I don't use very complicated tools to do that. I use just simple tools which are hand for me. So yeah, I think that's how I can connect with others like Kate and Arthi.
Interesting. I can just imagine you as a small child doodling in class and saying, no, this is just how I learn. This is what I need. I had a few people in my class like that too. That's really fascinating. And so Noeen and Arthi, you both come from academic backgrounds. So I'm curious, what advice do you have for someone who wants to transition from academia into science communication, but has no formal training in knowledge translation? How can they build a competitive resume?
That is a great question, and one that's very understandable because I think I also had that question when I was coming out of academia. And I think what it ultimately comes down to, and even now I can say as being on the other side and in the position of hiring other people, is it really just comes down to, does your resume show how interested you are in communication? Because it's really great if you have all the technical abilities and all of that, but when it really comes down to is, have you done something to show that you're interested in communication? And whether that's verbal communication, so people who really like, having their own YouTube channel or doing their podcasts or anything like that, that just gives you the experience of trying it out, or if it's experience like writing. So that can be even as simple as starting your own blog and just putting articles up yourself and just getting into the practice of writing for a different type of audience and getting even the experience of writing about something you're not necessarily an expert in. Because oftentimes when it comes to communication, you will be in the position of thinking about well, there's this new drug, this new illness, new something, and maybe I'm not the right expert or the person who's leading in that field, but I do know enough about science and I do know enough about this data that are coming out that I can still put together something for somebody else to understand and increase their knowledge about this particular set of information. And so in any way, if you can just start to build up different types of writing experiences, communication experiences, I think that goes a long way, and just really focusing on really getting the volume of experiences. I don't think it's necessary to really think about, I think some ways that people may get stuck as thinking about, do I need to get to the best science communication outlet or something like that? And while going for that would be great, and if you can get there, great, also don't let it hold you back. I think just really focusing on those initial writing experiences, those initial communication experiences is definitely a good start.
Mm-hmm. So kind of like what Noeen was saying earlier, when she was, producing some graphics voluntarily for people, and then eventually she learned, oh, I can actually get paid for this. And it kind of sounds like she was already building up her portfolio, which is what you're suggesting. Noeen, did you have anything to add to that?
No, you're right. I mean, you already picked that point that you need to volunteer first thing. And as Arthi said, that make whatever about start making graphics, start writing the blogs, and start doing these things. The other thing is you don't have to think that you don't have science communications formal training. I don't have any formal training.
I don't have it either.
You don't need to make things complicated for yourself. Start from the simple things. Start with simple tools that you have in hands, and start creating something with the resources which are available to you. So, and as Catherine already mentioned, you need to volunteer for others. You can, for example, if someone is writing a review article and you can say, okay, wow, you know what, I have some knowledge, I can make a graphic for you, but can you please put my name in the acknowledgement? I can make that illustration for you as a volunteer. But then you can always use that review article for yourself, for your resume. You can link it to your resume and you can say you have worked on this science illustration. People, when you are new in the market, people don't know about you. They don't know about your work, right? So the market works in a way about, like, it is based on the trust building. Like you have to build that trust. So they need to know your work. They need to know which type of the person you are. They need to know which type of the worker you are. Once you do some volunteer assignments for them, like I did one volunteer assignment. My first client was actually EM vaccines. They're working on COVID-19 vaccination, and they needed some biological pathway, and they needed me to draw it in the first place. And then they came back to me with a paperwork, and that was the moment for me, right? So I mean, they knew my work, they saw my work. I did as a volunteer, right? That was a volunteer thing. I took one project from UBC professor for a children's storybook where I was the main person to define the cartoon character of Corona. We named it as a Cornelius. So I had to draw that character, how it should look like and how it should behave in certain situations. So that was a volunteer thing. But what happened at the end, that project is still going on. But what happened at the end, I got the testimonials from those people. Those testimonials, the real life-based testimonials, are very important for you. They will act as your references to get some paid work in future. So for me, the only two things that I would like to add, that don't hesitate to offer your volunteer services, even to your colleagues, right? I offered one volunteer service to one of the colleagues, and he was writing a review article. I said, okay, I can make this tumor diagram and a picture, and you can just put my name in the in acknowledgement. So this is the first thing. Second thing, don't go for complicated thing. Don't go for complicated software. Oh, I need to have this software to do that. I need to have this thing. I can go in my later on. I can show you. I start with a simple thing. I don't pay for any software. I don't have any complicated tools in hand to do these things, really. So use your brain to think out of the box and to create something for yourself, what is available to you. So that will also help to sharpen your creative mind, you don't have to rely on more complicated resources for yourself. So yeah, and approach networking is important. Approach the people who are already in this field. Network with them, how they do that. Like this session is actually a channel for that thing too. Like you are learning from us, from Kate, from Arthi, from me about our experiences, and you can use those tools in future. So try to do the networking too. That's never hesitate to ask questions if you have. I mean, if you don't ask, people would not know what is going on in your mind or what answer you need. So never ever hesitate to ask questions. That's the first thing. So that will also help you to explore the opportunities. That's all.
Yeah, I really like that. And one thing that I'd like to emphasize from what you both have said, Arthi, is basically saying, just jump in, do the work, build something online for yourself. And Noeen's agreeing, saying the same thing, but then also kind of saying, advocate for yourself, ask to have that acknowledgement, request a testimonial. And this is how you sort of build your reputation, that you can sort of go to a new person. Very key insights. So we have about 5 minutes left in the panel discussion. So I'd like to ask Kate a big question. I'd like to try to get another question in before the panel closes and we go to the audience questions. But Kate, I'm curious, what is some of the best advice that you have received about your career?
I've been thinking about this because I think that it's a question we ask each other a lot, and women ask women that question often. So my advice, I think, is really advice that I got sort of early on as my roles and responsibilities changed and I got more responsibility and moved into more managerial roles, which was, and this might be hard for some of you scientists to follow, but it's sort of say yes, say yes, and then learn how to do it later. Don't say no because you don't have the experience yet. And maybe this echoes a little bit of the advice we're already hearing, but I sort of had this rule for myself where if I was asked to do something new, I just said yes. And then I would be frantically Googling later or talking to people or calling people. How do I do that? I want to do that. I don't know how to do it. So I think that that's part of that step to kind of, just like take a bit of a leap into the unknown, try it out. Maybe you're not going to like it. Maybe it's not going to be a good fit, but you'll have tried it. And when I think back, the things that I do regret are things I didn't do. And it sounds like it might be a bit of a cliche, but it really is the truth. You can fail and you still learn from it. But I think that's something we don't sort of remember enough and tell each other enough. Like, it's better to fail, really, than never to have tried. And all of us are always, this whole industry is so fluid, where it's shifting so much, and the notion of visual representation is getting increasingly important. I worked with a National Film Board animator last year to make an amazing 1-minute video about neuroscience. And she is just so in demand. There's more work than any of these people can really do, because we're all trying to say, draw me a picture and explain this concept to me. And sometimes we see these videos, I'm sure you guys have seen them, and you can build them yourself with a platform of a little like chalk drawing, that kind of takes you on that journey and helps illustrate that concept. And anyway, I just think that it's all about trying new things and sort of continuing to grow and adapt, because things get obsolete really quick.
So be courageous. And that also reminds me of what Arthi was saying about, if you want to get into writing, you don't have to be like 100% like deep expert in a topic. Like, you can still like have some faith in your skills, to analyze the research and just try. That really resonates with me personally. I feel it.
I think in my case, my background in journalism really helps, because when you're a journalist, you basically are an expert in nothing, but you are always trying to understand and explain to others something. So you're okay to just ask, the most simple, straightforward question. And sometimes we preface it with, talk to me like I'm in kindergarten and you're explaining this concept to a 5-year-old. What does that mean? And I think that can work well into, the different trajectories of your career.
So if you want to build, courage, get into the newsroom. That's what it sounds like to me. Just to finish off our panel discussion, Arthi, I'm wondering if you can tell us what you believe scientific communication, how do you believe scientific communication will shift in the future?
That is a really good question, and one that is always on my mind, because I think we're just witnessing there's so many different things, the expected and the unexpected, that are forcing science communication to really change. And I think where things are really going is, like Kate has mentioned, and even Noeen, about visual communication and just thinking through, I think the traditional type of way of communicating in science has usually been the peer-reviewed publication. And while the peer review process is really important and should absolutely be maintained, the concept of write a 3,500 word manuscript and have that be the place that somehow everyone is supposed to understand all the different lexicon and the jargon, that's really hard. And I think at the rate of innovation that we really need, we also need to be able to communicate in innovative ways. So thinking through, are there ways to incorporate the videos, the graphical abstracts, the infographics, animation, whatever it is, so that you're still communicating peer-reviewed research, and it is still accurate and it's still scientifically sound, but in a way that whether you're a member of the public audience, whether you're a scientific expert, you're still able to understand it. Because I think what we're also seeing is that so much of scientific innovation comes from people who are not talking to other experts. So when you think about even in neuroscience, something that was so big was the gut-brain axis, and that came from a conversation around people who are working with the gut and people who are working with the brain. And if you hadn't really had an opportunity for those conversations to happen, we would have missed out on a really important forefront now of neuroscience research. And it's so important, and it's so important for women's health research. It's so important for so many different fields of research. And so thinking through, how do you come back to the basics of good communication and what's the right way to put it out there, and using some of these ways that we can all really understand, like the visuals that we were just talking about, I think is where science communication will evolve and go towards.
Thanks so much. We have a few minutes to take some questions from the audience, but I recognize that there are a lot of questions and we won't be able to get to them all. So I'm thinking here, like, we need to do this again, because obviously there's a lot that people are curious about, and there's a lot of talent here on this call and a lot of experience and knowledge that you three bring. But let's start and dig into it. We got to just chip away at it. Let me just see. I'm wondering if, Leah, I really like your question. It seems like a few of the other audience members want to hear from it as well. Do you want to come on and ask a panelist the question yourself, or would you like me to ask?
Oh, sure. I can ask. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. Basically, my question was kind of how you get into the SciComm field, because I feel like it's a very new job role. I would say even when I was in high school or early university, I don't think I ever heard of that type of role. So I feel like even when you're on like LinkedIn or you're just like networking with people, actually knowing what roles without having to read through like every job description in detail, what kind of is like for, let's say, like a post-grad, either master's or PhD, what type of roles would be kind of the starting point to get into this type of role? Probably following academia, if you'd want to leave academia for like industry or similar, if that makes sense.
Does anybody want
I have a thought, Catherine.
Go ahead, Kate.
Thanks for your question. You know, between when I was invited to take part in this panel and today, Brain Canada actually posted for the first time a science writer position. And that just shows, I think, your point of how rapidly evolving the need for people who have a bit of a science background. And in our case, you know, yes, it was somebody maybe with a master's or PhD, but it could have also been even an undergrad who had done some other experience, sort of writing. And in our case, and I think a lot of health, like third-party funding organizations and health charities, you're not necessarily looking for, you know, like a really high level of expertise in terms of how technical you're going to be. It's really about distilling, understanding what to keep in and what to leave out and what's going to resonate, because a lot of organizations like Brain Canada, and I'm thinking of a lot of different healthcare charities too, really we have so many knowledgeable donors now. And we really want to be able to provide to them a very kind of concise but informed proposal for a particular project. And that's where the science writer comes in. You know, where I did my grads program in journalism at Concordia in Montreal, now for the first time is offering actually a science writing major that people can do. So I think it's just a growing field, and it's actually really, you know, if you have a science background, you're very well served to be able to start getting out there.
Arthi, Noeen, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that was great, Kate. Thank you so much for that answer. And I think the one thing that I just want to add is also to think about when you're looking for those experiences, what are you most interested in communicating about? I mean, I think there are different types of science writer and medical writer roles out there. So I think if you're really interested in liaising with public audiences, the type of science writer position that Kate was talking about, I think would be a really great opportunity. For me, because I've had the opportunity to work with public audiences as well as scientific audiences, and then ultimately landed on the latter, I would also just recommend thinking about medical writing. If talking about data, if talking about more of like the nitty-gritty around science and thinking about how to communicate with scientific audiences is something anyone here is interested in, medical writing is a great field to also work in. It is also certainly an evolving field and a growing field. And there are associate medical writer positions that will actually take people right out of graduate school. And so that could actually be your first step into medical writing, and to really thinking about if that's the right fit for you. And then, yeah, if you want to also look at scientific writer positions or science writer positions, it's just thinking a little bit more about who do you want to be really translating science for? Because I think, as Noeen mentioned, it really is like speaking or like translating science. And so I think when you know what you want to do, then it kind of helps also figure out what is your next step and where are you looking for that position that matches up.
Okay. Very good insights. I'm actually going to ask this question for KT. So the question is, for someone who's like already built a little bit of a portfolio for themselves and they're looking for maybe some freelance opportunities or paid opportunities, would networking with scientists that they're interested in be a good place to start for reaching out and looking for these science communication work opportunities?
I think yes, it can, because most of the time research papers and review articles, they come through the researchers and scientists, your fellow researchers and scientists, right? So they can, even sometimes many people are also working on writing books, which are very important, right? I also wrote a book together with my professor in Germany. So then when we were writing a book, for example, at that time I made lots of like graphics for myself, but of course if I would not be, then we would be looking out someone outside of our circle. And how it works in science, it's like a network, it's like a very small world, and it's like a compact world, and it's a network. I can tell this to my colleague, oh, you know what, I'm looking for a science communicator who can draw these illustrations and very nice, etc., etc. I'm working on this poster, or I'm working on this thing, and I really need to, or I'm writing a grant. For example, when EM vaccines, they came to me, they were working on the grant, the government grant they wanted to apply for, or I'm working on a grant, or I'm working on this, and that person will go to another person, right? It's like a chain process. So it is always look, and it is always good to talk with your fellow colleagues, fellow researchers, and your supervisors, that you know what, you are interested, you are very good in science illustrations. You can show them always your work, like 1 or 2 or 3 pictures, that this is the work that you have done, and they can see if they're interested or not. And most of the times when they pay you on based on your per hour. But how I would like for myself to be paid is per picture. Why I would like to, because every picture has different level of complications. Like some are the simple pictures, some are very complicated. It has many layers into it. And when it has more layers, then it means it is going to consume my lots of hours. So if I will put like also like 1, 2, 3, 4 hours, and if the rate is low for me, then it is not going to pay for me. So I go for like simple, medium, and more complex pictures. And I define it that if I am going to make a simple diagram or simple illustration, then it is going to cost me these many hours, and my cost is based on everything, right? So this is how you are going to do that. And so you can, if you are on the beginners level, then you are not going to ask like lots of, like you are going to also start with a moderate wage. I saw someone was asking in the chat box, so the wage is also, so you're going to start with a moderate rate for yourself, right? And once you start building your portfolio, then you can ask more money. And you don't have to jump into, like I already mentioned about it, that you don't have to jump into the complicated tools. Use what is a simple thing in hand. For example, my all science illustrations are on simple Microsoft Paint. That's it. I use, of course, instead of drawing on the paper, I draw on the screen using the pen, and I draw it on the screen on my Microsoft Pro on the Paint. That's it. It's a freehand style. And I don't use any other software at all. I don't have even paid subscription to any software. Paint has enough tools if you know properly how to use it. If you are good in drawing on the paper, you can draw on the screen too. It's just a matter of the grip of your hand on the pen or the stylus. So you are just drawing there. There are so many tools that you are adding the watercolor outside. On the paper, you are using the watercolor tool on the paint too. I have never used even Photoshop, no, for my graphic. I have not used it at all. I use paint, and when I have to add like simple write-up stuff, if I can I can actually share my screen and I can actually show you quickly. For example,
we only have a 1 minute left in the event, and I just want to be respectful of.
Yeah, so I can just show you quickly. So this is all made on the paint, and I'm using just a simple language. You can say this is all about the neurons, how they are going to die. So you're just picking up the simple concepts, and you're going to try. It has nothing at all from your, complicated tools or software. So that's what I mostly use. So you can see it's a simple cartoon design of the protein, and it works as a diamond. So it's very happy, right? So for me, what is the important message I'm going to convey and the simple tools, and you have to look for the networking. And this is how you can actually do these things basically.
Well, I got my wish. I got to see your cartoons, so that was exciting. And you know what, Naween, there's a few questions in the chat about what tools you use. So I think maybe what I'll do is after we conclude the event today, maybe I'll reach out to you and you can send me a list of some of the tools that you do actually use. And then in our email to all of the registrants, we'll send them out to everyone so that they can explore those tools themselves. But I'd just like to thank all of you for coming today, and to Kate, Arthi, and Naween for carving out time in your days to share all of this wisdom, experience, and information with our audience. Obviously, there were a lot of questions that we didn't get through. I'm going to save those questions so that maybe we can find some way for you to answer them and send it out to them afterwards too. And maybe we can come together and do this again sometime. But until then, I just want to say thank you again so much for coming here and sharing your experiences with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone, and thanks for the invitation, Catherine.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope everybody has a wonderful day. We've recorded this session, so we're going to be publishing it on YouTube, and within the next couple of hours, you should receive an email from us with a link. So if you want to watch it again or share with your friends, you're more than welcome to do so. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks everyone. Enjoy your evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are, and take care.